Hi, my name is Benedict. If you've been following me religiously, as I obviously hope that you have, you'd know the last couple of videos that I've made have been about taking a piece, mixing and mastering it. My worry in there, and maybe I shouldn't worry about these things, maybe I should just do exactly what I want and not worry about what you want. But I do worry about what you want. And I worry that maybe in that mix, you felt like, well, this isn't our style of music. This isn't showing us all the stuff that you might do, because it was kind of a simple mix. It sort of mixed itself. Um, but nonetheless, I think that that was a great thing to show, because it shows you how simple an effective mix can be, and that that really is your aim. But I've got another one here. That one was a TV theme. It was based around the Midsummer Murders. This one is another TV theme. This one is based around a similar thing. It's the Father Brown show, which also has a beautifully clever theme tune, which is again built around a kind of small orchestra and a lot of cleverness and some rather close notes which give you that sense of mystery. Now, we're not working this time on the orchestral version, because my plan with each of these TV themes is to treat them. So this is like the second version. I've done my orchestral version using the sample sets, and I'm pleased with how that sounds, but I also want to do a Benedictized version. So in this version, I've gone ahead and revoiced the sounds, and all the notes are the same. To me, revoicing isn't about saying, oh, I'm going to turn this into a different piece of music. I think that's actually laziness. It's to be able to take the same piece of music and reimagine the sound of it without actually changing the piece. So we've got the first part, which is taken reasonably directly from the actual Father Brown score, and the second part, which is my variations on based around the original work. So again, these are the kinds of things that you might hear in the middle of an episode as things are going on, that somehow always echo back to the main theme. I've swapped all the sounds out for very Benedict-y, very electronic sounds, but I've been super good as I've done that, and I've focused only on the sound, as you'll see. So we've got our piece of music. We will start and walk you quickly through it. Deliberately, I've done everything I can to not mix it. At the moment, it has no mix, and it's a bit riotous, especially in these cams. And as we can see, we know why. It is running too hot. It's reaching the top of the mix. There are a couple of things in here that are really too loud, that really need to be addressed. But that's cool, because when a composer is composing, they're thinking about the feel of what their notes are doing. They should not be spending all their time thinking about producery things, because otherwise they're now wearing somebody else's hat. They're taking away from the strength of their being a composer, and they're diluting that with a whole lot of other decisions. Now, I appreciate that a lot of us bedroom boys, the guys with doors who sit there indoors, we like to actually pride ourselves on how much more talented and more special we are, because we do the notes, we do the arrangement, we do the mixing, we do all the producery shit, and then we go off and master the fuck out of it. I don't think this is the wisest way to approach it. I learned early on to, while still kind of doing all those things, because I had to do them all myself, to always see it as though there was the creating the piece of music, Benedict, and there was the arranging Benedict, and then there was the mixer producer-y Benedict, so that I could sidestep my roles. I learned to be able to do that quite quickly, rather than trying to say I'm all of these things as once, in one ball of Benedict, that I'm all of these things at once. No. Break my mindset that little bit as I move from task to task. I can flip backwards and forwards fairly quickly, but that prevents me from falling into the rabbit hole that I see a lot of people fall into, which means that in the end what they turn out is a disappointment for them, because it somehow never achieves what they're hoping for, because there were too many compromises and too many attempts to go beyond themselves, which lead to confusion. So mixer board, typically Benedict, not a whit happening. That is fine. I know the thing that you're all dying to see is this. You all are hoping to see, ooh, lots of knobs and buttons and flicky things flicking. How exciting is that? Ooh, interesting synths. They're not the stock ones. Ooh, they're interesting. Ooh, they must be secret. Ooh, so secret, that one's got my name on it. Now, the first thing that I do is, once I've got the sound that I'm looking for to compose, I close it down. I'm finished with that bit. That sound is working. It's doing its job. I close it down. I understand that it seems super cool that you can look at studios with racks and racks of knobs everywhere, but that says to me that you're more interested in the knobs than you are in what those knobs are supposed to be doing for you. They're just knobs. Now, part of you is probably going, Benedict, you're such a knob for saying that. Yeah, good on you. You're entitled to that. But if you're trying to learn and you're struggling and you're going, Benedict, I want you to help me understand how you manage to achieve all this stuff that you do, and I don't, perhaps it is because you have a bit too much of an obsession with the technology, with the knobs, that you feel very knobby, and because of you feel very knobby, you feel very synthy, and because you feel very synthy, then you make sure the sound is like synthy and producery and knobby. And you see how none of that's got to do with making a melody, telling a story. All you're doing is taking that whole excitement, and that's all you publish. The number of things I see published out there, and they're really just that expression of producer knobberiness. I'm not saying those people are knobs. Some of them are, sadly, the way they promote them. But their whole story is just, look at my knobs. There's a kind of self-advertising that certain men are prone to doing exactly that. Is that part of why things aren't working out for you? Now, my client here has given a fairly typical rough mix in certain respects. Some things are just too darned loud. Thankfully, my client has also been pretty smart and not gone off and tried to get producery. He's focused on his piece of music, which in this case is somebody else's piece of music that he's then added his bits to. But he's focused on his composing and left the mixery shit to me. Yes, I know I am the client as well, but I'm showing you how you can divide yourself and how it can have you think differently. Now, part of my brief from my client, obviously we've gone to an almost switched on Bachian kind of sound here, taken elements of orchestra-y type sounds, but really blipped them up in that really old voltage kind of a way. He's also suggested that, in terms of the overall feel, would still like to keep that sort of very, 1970 feeling, and in that has suggested maybe a spring reverb is the way for me to go. Okay? That doesn't promise that I'm going to deliver a spring reverb, but it means I'm going to start there. So, giving myself a little bit of a leg up, I gave myself a spring reverb sound. So this I have created. I like this device for doing this sort of thing. You can create your own imaginary reverbs. And so it's got quite a few taps going on. It's got a fairly fast modulation rate, the ability to change that modulation rate per tap or move it around somehow. I don't know how it does it, don't care. It just does it. And to modulate that. So we're looking for extra depth and even a little bit of that going off into noise feel. So I've created this as a starting point. So that's my send. My masters are, of course, doing nothing other than catching the overly enthusiastic mix that has been sent to me. So we can shut that down because we don't want to know about it. So my workspace now is pretty minimal. And that's a good thing. I now need to decide where I'm going to start from as I attack this different sounding version of a piece that I know and love. Very tempting to start in the drums, but I'm not going to, because I know that's what lots of you do. But I learned early on that if I make a mix where the drums are huge, like I've soloed my drums and I huge them up as much as I can so they're like killing, I've got nowhere left to go for my mix, because my mix needs to contain all the things in my piece of music. If I just say that, oh, the drums are the only important piece of this music, it's kind of insulting to the composer. So I'll start by having a wee listen again to what have I got. We'll wait for the music to start to come Okay, so I'm picking out a section. Now what I think is interesting here is that those bass sounds are actually not technically bass sounds. They're not working in the bass register anymore. They've actually been pulled up by probably a couple of octaves, so that they're blip, 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 blip up here, rather than boom, 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 boom down there. That's a creative decision. That's interesting. Because a piece normally appears to sit on the bass, it is tempting to start in the bass, just like it's tempting to start in the drums, but I think that's where you can go astray. I will normally try and work from the melodies, but the fact that this bass has been moved up, and the fact that we're looking for a sort of very vaulty kind of a sound, makes me think I want to start with these couple of basses, which are kooky. Therefore, they're helping set the scene for what we're going to do. So I'm going to take them and pop them in solo. Bass 1 and bass 2. That's these two fellas here. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to try attacking this mix from the angle of getting them to be the platform on which we build everything around. Just as many of you say, oh, I'm going to start with the drums and the bass and they're the platform I build everything around, I have a policy of virtually never doing that, because you make them too big, you use all the bandwidth and you're screwed with the rest of the mix, because you're busy running to try and create space that's never going to occur. So I like something about these two sounds. Go back to my mixer. No, that's not my mixer button. That's my mixer button there. I've got my reverb. So let's assign some reverb. Okay, we can kill that. And for the moment we've got that set to loop, we'll kill that too. Let's just get them out of the way. Normally I work on two monitors, so I'd have my rack over on my other monitor, So I'd be able to see the sequence and some of the mixer here and just turn over to my other monitor. I'm not going to be able to record a screen successfully whilst trying to do that. It's going to be horrid. So I'll open these guys up. So this is a sound that seems to carry most of what's going on here. So let's get a sense of what it does. Very, very simple sound, like incredibly simple sound, which is cool. I like to see simple sounds because that shows off what we're doing. But with this style of music, I think that we want some delays. Benedict likes delays. So I'm going to go for, there we go, Jiggery Pokery's Titus. I like this delay. It's Bucket Brigade, and it degrades the sound. It does some nice stuff to the sound. I don't want to do anything too exciting here. Obviously that mix is somewhat not very good, but we want to find try milliseconds. Delays are nice when they're not exactly perfect. There are times where you want a real digital delay where it's exact replicas. It's a sound, but we're going for a voltagey feel, so we don't want that. A feature of this device, which is rather cool, is that you can wire in another device in the middle of the taps, so we can send the taps out and back. The Echo does that too, and I use the Echo a lot, more than any other delay line, but Titus has a natural sound, so I want to apply some character here. Titus has character. So making sure that I'm sending each tap out and through this device. I forgot there for a moment and left the in-house feedback. This allows you to have your in-house feedback as well as your external feedback, so you can do some scarily horrible stuff with it if you so desire. Yes, let's just stop that for a moment. Sorry. It's through trying these things that you learn stuff. I think I hurt its feelings. Oh, I know why. Let me just get back to my sequencer. There we go. I think so. Okay, still happy with that. So that's me just focusing not on changing the sound, but just adding a little bit to what it's doing for us in the mix. Now this fella here, which is something I've thought before and I might want to do, and I'm just going to try. I'm not going to do there. I'll probably look at that when it comes to EQ. I was just seeing if I could get a little bit more brightness out of it without changing the tone of the sound or the timbre of the sound, but it's going to change the timbre of the sound. I don't want to change the timbre, I just want to change the tone a little bit. This guy's a lot brighter, that's cool. So let's see what we can do with this. This one has a delay already built in. The last one actually does. No, it doesn't. Okay. I'm going to turn that off because that's such a short delay. It looks like that was where they were looking at the idea of these spring reverbs. We've already got one which we've applied, so I'm not sure whether we really want to be doubling up. We might, but I'm not sure that we do. I'm going to go with a different delay here. What do I feel like using as another delay line? Why not go with air raids? Because I don't want to give these two similar things the same treatment. Sometimes you want to give them the same treatment, bust them together, they'll be the same. But they're similar, but I want them to carry a sense of difference too. So I don't want them to have the same. Okay, so what I did there, different delay, different sound. Again, I've bypassed BPM stuff. I'm not a massive fan of immediately BPMing everything. It's too perfect, it's too unthought out, especially where you're defaulting to 3/16ths, and so you put 3/16ths on everything because somebody said it was the cool thing to do. No. Do it if you want, but only if you've thought about it and it's the best solution. So I really like to have them not BPM'd, use the feel. So I'm not looking to be like, oh, is this in the right place? No, this feels like it's in the right place. It's giving me perhaps a polyrhythmic thing, but it's adding a character of its own. I've played around with stereo. I've ended up with a stereo. Again, easy to go, oh, but I'll just make a ping pong. I don't like ping pongs. I like the idea of ping pongs, but I struggle with them in practice because they tend to end up sounding unnatural. There's nothing wrong with bink, 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 because we hear that all the time out of a room that we're in. But ping pongs where their BPMs don't work, but stereo, where you can dial some here and some there and they can both be wrong, somehow can be really lovely. Rolled some tops and bottoms. I really want to roll the bottoms off because I don't want a lot of mud under here. And mix, again, could be problematic, seeing I'm in these darn things, but I think it's probably about right. So the pair of these sounds now. Before we get into pans or anything, we may undo some of this stuff with pans, but in terms of that as a basis, the backbone of my piece, I think it's kind of cool. So now let's look at some of the other things. Actually, probably the best way to handle this right now is for us to go to here and mute everything. Actually, I keep forgetting if I choose everything, then I can mute. That's a recent feature, and I keep forgetting that it's a recent feature until I fall for it and I go, wait, there's like 300 things muted. So the next thing I want to look at there is this cello sound. Kooky. Sounds like every cello I've ever heard. Not. Don't need to see them, they're out of the way. Okay, so it's carrying some of the same thinking of these. These are supposed to be basses, but they're speaking up here. This fella is speaking both a bit low and silly high, like video game high. Kooky choice, but in theme with the other choices made. So we are of course going to need to go not to our sequencer but to our mixer. Maybe I'll just send them all to this. That's going to be the easy way. I won't do that yet. I'll come back and do that. That way I can discuss it with you better. So thank you, mixer. So I'm listening to that thinking, what does this need? It's very easy for me to go, oh, that's a cello sound, so it needs this. Or that's a bass sound, so it needs this. That's thoughtless. It's like saying, oh, well, I need a drum line, therefore I need the biggest 909 sample. It's thoughtless. So I'm trying very hard not to be thoughtless and to think, well, what's this sound calling for? I feel like it's calling for something in the drive me a little bit arena. So then I've just got to get, let me listen to it again, a sense of well, what's it looking for there. It wants to be subtle, wants to be interesting. Don't think it wants to be that. Dawns. No, don't want that. Sorry, excuse me as I talk to myself. Look, where else fails, start with stock units. Scream. You're watching me just do stuff, but I'm working on the assumption that you've got some idea of what I'm doing. Not mind reading, but that you've got some idea of what you're doing. So what I'm looking for here is saturation. So that little bit of overdrive that sort of glues this sound together, because it's got a couple of separate parts. And it's not that I want to get rid of them as separate parts, it's just I want that to be a cohesive sound. I also think that it needs a little bit of magic that you can pull in when you start to saturate a sound. I've tried to be relatively kind there. The last thing I want is a screaming blast of distortion. This isn't death metal. Added in a little bit of welly again, because I know this overdrive tends to actually take it away. There are other devices that don't take it away, this device does. But at the same time, you'll see that I've gone through options that put a lot of in there, but I'm recalling that the decision was made to actually lift these bass sounds out of the bass register. I'm also remembering that there's a drum machine in there which is really bassy. So the old CR8000, you've got quite a bassy sound in there. So that drum machine's going to fill a lot of that space. I don't want to compete with it, because that's been put there for the sound of that drum machine, the joy that it brings, the sound that it brings. So a little bit of finesse there to the sound. So this is a problem. Not an unusual problem at all, but we have far too much reverb overall so far. Not a bad problem to have. So we've got to work out how best to solve it. Okay, so the reverb sounded great on its own, but once I start to mix these instruments, obviously too much of it, we're just kind of creating this mush that everything's sitting in. We're losing the finesse of our instruments. And it's really important to keep the finesse of our instruments and the effect spaces that we put them in clear. That reverb, as is very much the nature of spring reverbs, if you use a lot of them, is tending to swallow everything. Character reverb, so we've got to go a wee bit cautiously on it. Now, as I said, that may even get sacrificed in the end if it becomes problematic. But for the moment, I think we've got a reasonable balance there. Because these are playing a detailed role, a bass role, then we will back that off quite a bit. It's a string sound, so we'll give it a bit to be going on with. Next stop is our cello melody. Cello-dy. Now obviously this stands out. So it's got amplitude or ring modulation along with oscillator sync, little bit of modulation on those oscillators to really make that an interesting sound through a filter, but put through a comb filter. So everything about this sound says interesting. Cool. I can live with that, but it's too loud. So the first thing we're going to do is compress it. Now we've got to work out how do we want to compress it. Just saying, oh, we'll hammer it. hammered. Is that what we want to achieve? We'll start with this, see what we get. Usual rules. All of this. Let's find how this sound's going to move. Okay, that's telling me that it's not compressing at all, which of course I do wonder at. Why are we not compressing? Audio out to audio in, that all looks pretty normal. Just passing through. Oh, silly. There we go. Sorry, easy to be distracted. This is not like a bus where I'm looking to find where it grooves. I'm looking to find how to flatten this sound out a little bit, just how to tame it a bit. It's a very complex sound. It's not necessarily an easy sound to mix. I'd like to find something that I can have it pull through, because it's operating like this much frequency. It's very broad, actually. Let's have a bit of a look-see here. Now notice how I've pulled this in. These are kind of freebies. Really quite interesting. Don't automatically think, oh, I must run out and get those to sound pro. They're really interestingly built devices, but if you don't have the understanding of what they do, they're not the friendliest GUIs. So they're designed for people who know what they're doing. It doesn't mean that you can't use them. Anyone can use them, and go for it. They're super cool, but they're freebie cut downs of a pretty expensive set of devices. So please don't grab them thinking, oh, they're going to sound more pro, because no, if anything, you can make them sound, you can make yourself sound worse if you don't really understand what these things are doing. But I've been pretty pleased with the results of things that I have done with them, and I think this could be useful here. Now you'll see that I've tried switching different devices in and out. 8 effects are not better than 7. 2 effects is better than 8. So is each bringing something? Also, see that I'm shuffling the order in which they come, and that's actually changing the sound. So do I want to allow the saturator to have all of that varying level, which means it's going to bite harder at certain times, or do I want to compress that level before it hits the saturator, which means we're going to have a more even sort of distortion tone? Do I want to equalize before or after the saturation? Equalizing after the saturation just means that we're enhancing the ugly stuff that it's made in the middle there. Sometimes great, sometimes just a really bad idea. So in this current configuration, we've evened out our sound dynamics, so we get a more even saturation tone. We've said to the saturator, I want you to emphasize these frequencies, de-emphasize these, and then let it have it. For the moment, I'll say, look, that's probably okay. It may not be the best EQ to have used on the second half. Actually, no, I think I'm comfortable to say it's not the right EQ. Let me go pull out another one which has a different feel. These guys, slick. This comes from knowing your devices. You don't just go, oh, this is a more pro device, or I'm told it's a better sounding device. Know your device. Know what it does. Know how it makes things sound different. See, two devices, when they've got the right feel, with less going on, actually turn out to be better than 4 or 5. So it's a case of not saying that these devices are better, just me knowing that this little guy has a subtle sound and a warm sound. It's got variations of saturation built into it and can really give a clarity but a softness to a sound. With a harsh sound, I want to soften that off a little bit, and I know that took a long time, but this is part of what I set out to show you, that these things, you don't want to rush them. I think that's better. Let's move to a different section. Okay, cool. I'm happy with that. Now, do I want to chorus it? Is the question that I get coming from myself now. A-Rate Audio, their chorus is big. Ridiculous at times, but big. I think you can use some of that. Violins. It's opening on the other screen. I'm not going to go chasing it back. I know what it's doing. So, this fella is a kooky thing. Doesn't have any filter or anything. Its aim is to allow 4 different oscillators to each have its tuning being controlled independently. So in this case, I'm applying a separate vibrato speed to each of those 4 oscillators. And to a pulse width modulation as well. It's a pulse rather than a sawtooth. But it's got no filter, no anything other than just the ability to play all 4 of these fellas at once. It's an interesting device because of that. Yes, I made it, but I made it to serve a purpose. So now we want to do a little bit more external processing. So what's a nice filter that I can use? The stock one that comes with Reason, I'll try it actually, because why not? Where are we? Envelope control filter. I think it calls it itself. Envelope control bothers me every time. I quite like it. There's another filter I do want to try though. Now, where are you? You are that one there. I've made sure I've bypassed that one. Let's see what we get out of this. Always defaults to a high pass. Why? them both. Each brings something. I quite like that band pass filter to start with, but I've realised there that sounds great, but at that point it's actually too dark. This is our lead melody. It's got to, really come out. So I was for a moment there focusing too much on the tone rather than the roll. Easy to do, but reminded myself, got back on track. I chorused the cello melody, attempting to chorus the violins as well, but they've got such a Selena-y kind of a sound, string machine sort of a sound, that a phaser seemed like a good way of attacking that. I'm using the phaser a bit more like a chorus. It's running pretty fast, and it's sort of fattening up, but it's not fattening up in that flubby, retro-wavy sort of way, where everything's unison to buggery. It's just adding more character, but a little bit of smoothness to the sound at once. I think I'm happy with that. Let's look at the mixer so we can look at reverb on this. Okay, I'll sit with that for now. Turn that off, back to the rack. So the next one is our, sorry, let's just, I want to be clear, I'm going in the right direction. Violins, trombone, of course it's our trombone. Who doesn't like a good tromboning? So, pretty sound. Let's see what it's doing. Already I can hear there's just too much reverberation happening. Supporting sound, so we want that to be clear, but it's going to want to sit back in the mix. You can use reverb to make it sit back in the mix, but in this instance, that reverb that we've got, if we keep that, it's not sitting nicely. So let's try again. It plays in a certain range. I want it to be nice and clear there, bring out some of the character of it, but I'm not too concerned if we end up losing some of the other stuff. It works in a place, and let's keep it working there. I think that brings that out nicely using the slicks, really nice but subtle EQing to pull that through, which leaves us with our French horn. Let's see where our horny Frenchmen play. Really in the same place. So the two are playing together. Which sounds like panning to me. Oh, how cool is that? I really like the space around that sound, and I want to make the most of that, so possibly even fill in and bring in another reverb, seeing that sort of spring that I've made is you can't do too much of it. I love the sound, but have too much together, it's not sitting nicely. So my friend, this guy, he's partly my friend because I know he's nobody else's friend. That makes him an interesting fella. That trombone has got too loud, so I will go to the mixer. Just try and even up that, so because I knew the trombone was too loud straight away, but as long as I didn't need to make any mixing decisions against him, it was fine, but now I do. Now, something I know about these little units is that they are prone to reducing overall volume. I think that's probably given me what I want. Maybe I need a little bit of echo in there. It needs to have a unique space around him. So I'm actually going to use this. Time to take the bins out, but good luck with that. It's raining. I don't get wet. Ugh. It's for losers, getting wet. Am I playing the right sound? No, I'm not. Didn't think so. Now you may think, Benedict, you're trying to fill that sound out, but you're not using unisons, choruses, any of those kinds of things. No, the reason I don't is, it's not to say you couldn't use them, but the reason I'm not choosing them right now as a first course is that has a cute, clear sound of its own. We start adding chorusy stuff, we're actually going to reduce its uniqueness. Don't want to do that. The violins, like drowning in uniqueness, they can use losing some of that. This fella is really kooky. I want to keep that, so I've done that with more space than width. Let's get rid of our solos. Okay, I think that's alright. I'm happy enough with that. So what have we got left? Noise. Yeah, I'll do that now. I'm not doing anything to that sound. I like that sound. I know I made that sound, but I'm coming back and trying to check it from the outside. I've got several layers of movement in here, moving filters here and there, combs and essentially a flanger in here as well. So they're all creating quite a lot of movement in there. I don't want to do too much on top of that, or we're going to end up with less than we had in the first place, which reminds me. Yep, we don't want to overdo the reverb. It's very easy to overdo the reverb on effect sounds, and particularly things like this sort of wind noise. Part of the reason it's really effective and engaging is actually through the detail. Putting a lot of reverb makes it sound washy and great and big and grand, but you're actually blurring all the detail off. Blur. It's no longer as exciting. But we do need to do some sequencer work with this fellow. It is not fully composed, shall we say. Not well arranged. Now, I know from speaking to the composer that this is going to be a kind of bridge between the original orchestral versions and the revoices. So the original version starts with a sound effect, and this being the spacer in the middle of the album, even though it belongs to this track, that's why we've got this long bit of white noise. It says we're moving to a different space and time, as white noise almost always does when we do this in pieces. So I am looking to, I think I'm on the wrong, that's why it doesn't seem to match, and master level. We need to deal with that. So 100%. Probably back out to 0 down here. Maybe not, maybe I'll move it to there. Yeah, it feels about right. Now let's see how we bring this in. Cool. Now the long intro, it is saying to us, I am transporting you to another place. Cool. Let's now look at the ending. Alright, so it comes in a bit too, didn't want to do that, comes in a bit too hard, shall we say. So let's take that back and see how we go here. Counting there for my 5-second gap. All that does is some performance stuff. So as a mix engineer who's otherwise happy with the performance, or got no business in the performance, as the case may be, then I ain't touching that. This sound, probably done with. It's a sound effect. Don't need to focus too much on it. I'll fold it up. Same with these things. Fold them up, get them out of the way. The less I have to look at, the better. That way I can focus on the things that I've got. So I've run through my piece now and worked on all of those sounds, and I think, you know, enhancified, producerified those sounds. I have forgotten the drum machine. Now we'll have a look at his rack presence, which is over here. Hear that underneath. These aren't giving it to me, but I know that out there in my Yamos there's quite a bit of, which is cool. That's part of the charm of this machine, which is, remember why I didn't go too heavy on the bass part of it, because I'm going to let this inhabit that area. Because we love hearing these kinds of drum machines, and who wouldn't? I'm going to do a little bit of something to this. What's that little bit of something Benedict wants to do? I know where it is. Yells. There's nothing like the sound of a plate. Nothing at all. That's good. So here how I've added a kind of body to the drums. I'm not breaking these drums out. I know it's super fashionable for people to say you can only handle a drum kit when you break every single sound out. No, I love these drum kits for the way they sound together. So I'm going to process it together. Now I just need to make the decision whether I process that reverb into it or outside of it. And also whether I want to process it in a kooky way. I'm going to have a go at that because I do love doing this to my drum machines. Okay, now, I just found myself a compelling reason to break something out. So you've actually seen it here, boys and girls. Benedict's about to break out a sound. He said he doesn't do it, but he's just about to. So, remember how to do such a thing. Insert a utility, a mix channel. I now want the congas out, which is 8 and 9. Okay, so I'm just trying to think, how do I want to do that? I will do this submixer, bringing things in. I'll have to wire them up. 8 and 9. They need to go to the input of said mixer channel. Can I put that above? Yes. Now this fella will remember its patches, so I want to grab another one of these. I may use 2, that's why I'm not just automatically shift dragging it across there. Copy patch, paste patch. I'll turn that off now with a bit of luck. Just my toms. I really liked that feel that I got there, but if I put that on the whole kit, I think we had problems. Kind of a silly thing to do, but few different patterns, so I just want to make sure that I don't make something that sounds good on one pattern and doesn't really work for the others. That's why I sidestepped for a moment there. Don't need to see Mr. Mixer, don't actually even need to see this. Let's me focus on this. I'm going to close those down because I feel I'm happy with them. So I can focus on this. This is a frequency shifter, not a pitch shifter. So it just takes the frequencies and moves them all up without any sense of keeping the harmonics in the right order. A pitch shifter will keep all the harmonics in the right order. A frequency shifter will just drag them all up. So it's like half a ring modulator. Put this in a different mode, you've got a fully fledged ring modulator. Now sometimes I can get the effect that I want with a small shift and just listening to the shifted thing, which is what we've ended up on those toms. But a lot of times I'll go for a more dramatic shift, often up, because it helps put top end on a lot of the components in my drum machine, and then a little bit of mix. We've got one slight issue though, that because I've broken these out, the toms are no longer going through this reverb. So probably the safest way of handling that, we could go into extra mixes and what have you, but I'm thinking let's drag it over here. It's onto our masters, it's been wired up automatically, thank you. We'll go to our mix air. We'll solo these two. That's the other problem we had there. Want these to match. Again, I could have just put them into a bus, but the only trade-off that I've made there, and maybe it's an issue, maybe it's not, is that yeah, if I bust them, then that reverb sound would be going through the second spring there as well. So the decision I've made has made for a different sound. Don't know that I'm worried enough. In some ways it's perhaps kind of cool because we've now paralleled a couple of sounds beside each other. No, I'm happy with that. I think paralleling them is probably giving it a little bit more, if anything. Only possible concern there is that I may have a little too much of this on the kick drum, but I don't want to break that kick drum out, because if I break it out it's now separate from this kit, and I don't really want to do that, so I might try one mix. That'll do. So I've just reduced that mix. Again, that may be a wrong decision because of these. I'm not all unhappy for the kick drum to have a kind of cowbelly thing on top of it. I just don't want it to have too much. I don't want it to distract from the kick drumminess of it. Another common thing that people would do is, and I would have probably looked at it if I had bussed this, is to bring them together and compress them, but I don't feel the need to do that, so I'm just not going to do it. I mean, yeah, I could get in there and go, oh, let's play around with different kinds of compression and see what I get, but I like the sound of that machine on its own, so I don't see why I should be obliged to change it, other than what I've done. Now, I'm going to go through the mix stage. This obviously will have been fairly long, but you're used to that from me, and I'm doing it all in one go for you, deliberately. So let's run through our devices. This is the stage where I look at what's happening tonally. I'm aware of that, and I'll make gross tone decisions, timbre decisions at the instrument, but mixed tone decisions I'll make in the mix. So I've gone from the producery phase, where I'm working on each of those sounds to make it more cool, to a mix phase, which is all just about finding the right balance of elements. What I'm doing right now is finding the right tone. Now I can see that little sort of cowbelly type sound there. Let's just scoot back. But I did also note that it was similar to the frequency of another sound that was around it. So I want to be like super cautious. So we'll narrow this as much as we can. Okay, happy with that. So I've de-emphasized that cowbelly sound on top of the kick, only a tiny, tiny bit. And in that, all of up here, a bit bright. I don't want this to dominate the mix. A good CR anything sound, to me, is nice and warm. It's got a round bottom end, which we've got here. We've pulled off some of the blip underneath, so that allows a little bit more clarity in here. It's all about clarity. Those sounds are surprisingly clear, and that's part of their charm, because they're simple compared to a normal rock kit, which is a big mess of sound. So I've given it a tiny boost at the first harmonic, because if people hear the first harmonic more clearly, their brains will fill in the fundamental. So it allows me, rather than putting a lot of energy here, to lift that energy slightly to pull it through the mix. Exactly the same technique or trick as what I've done where I've used the frequency shifter to add brighter ring modulating sort of sounds on top of the whole kit. It pulls that kit up in the mix and through. I've rolled off some of the treble, partly because we've added a lot more through that process I just described. When I come to boost the whole mix with the air, I don't want my drums occupying the air or dominating the air in this mix. So I'll roll them back a bit here, they'll come back up in the master, and the right instrument then should occupy the air or dominate the air. So a little bit of that. Just these toms. Thank you. Then, given a little bit, I've rolled off some of this, but I've given a little bit of a peak on the end there. I've found the point where they cut through the mix a little bit better. Really finesse. I'm not trying to give these instruments a megaphone. I want them to sound lovely and understated, which will give them more power. So you look at some mixes where drum machines were added in underneath, or where there were drum loops added in underneath. Interestingly, the first one that comes to mind there is actually Toto's Africa. And it's actually a real drum loop. They've played that thing the whole way through. Poor tired arms bastard. But that sits through there and actually plays the role of a drum machine. And it's not unusual for people to think of that as having been a drum machine. But it's subtle, and its subtlety ends up dominating the mix. Bass. Hear how it comes together. We've got our bass lifted right up and our kick drum doing that lovely whoop, whoop, whoop underneath it. So, very clever composer here. He knows his orchestra. But I did want to brighten this sound up without changing its timbre. I want to change its tone. So what I had to decide there was whether I wanted it really broad. Initially the really broad sounds great, but then you put it in a mix and you feel like, yeah, this whole sound's just going to start to take over. It's not designed to take over. It needs to be present in the mix. Remember, I've decided this is the backbone of our mix. It's not our drums. Let the audience think that. But I know the backbone of my mix is actually these two bass sounds. So I'm happy with that. Bass 2. checking the range of the instrument, you know, how low does it play. I know there's not really anything happening in down there, but we've got other stuff happening, so let's not let it interfere. It cost me virtually nothing in terms of time to turn on the device there. Okay, this was that interesting sound that has a few components to it. Hear how, even though I'm boosting at 180, that whole sound seems bassier and warmer without me having to struggle with my drums, which are essentially the bass instruments in this case here. But this is carrying quite a bit down there too. I've boosted a little bit of that bit up top because it's there for a reason. My esteemed composer and sound designer has put that on top for a reason. This is a low sound, but I want it to cut where I've already taken both of my basses up to blip, 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 blip territory. I've left this one low because you still need something to play down there, otherwise it becomes very empty. But I've mostly let the drum machine live there, but this fella's playing a melodic line down there as well, but it needs to cut. I've lifted those basses high, so I've added something a little bit higher, which helps tie those all together. A little bit of emphasis here, but this sound is prone to, and you would have noticed it hopefully when I boosted this, it's got a real honk to it. Bop, bop, bop. If it was a brass sound, I'd probably be like righteous. But it's not a brass sound. I don't want it honking like that. So, subtle. Well, the 3 dB's borderline or subtle, but I've hacked it out without messing up the overall sound. The reason I soloed it there was because I have had at this sound, and I just want to make sure that I haven't damaged it. Because you can think, oh yeah, it sounds great, and then you realise you've damaged it somewhere else, it's not going to work. I'm always working in the mix, but I'll check every now and then, just zoom in, zoom back out. Part of being a producer, a real producer, not someone that's like, oh yo dudes, I just dropped some tunes that I produced. Part of being a real record producer is that ability to see minute details that other people aren't necessarily even going to see, and see the big picture, and to see how they relate to each other. So to have that context of near and far, all at the same time. I'm actually blessed and cursed with that at the same time. That's one of the gifts that my autism has given me, the ability to do that. I thought everyone did that. I've realized more recently that not many people do that. Often they're found unemployed or doing something like a photographer. Like a photographer can seem to take a photo of a big scene, and yet somehow you as the viewer of said photo see this little person, in the background, geez, that's really hard with the camera, sees a little person in the background as though they're the whole subject. Kind of like Mona Lisa up close and personal to a little subject in the background, maybe under a great big tree. That's that skill in a more visual context. Now, not everyone has that. Honestly, any skill we can improve upon, but if it's not where you're strongest, you're actually better off investing in where you're strongest and then working with somebody who's strong in that other thing. So that's explaining why I'm zipping in and out, and part of what defines a good record producer from somebody whose idea of producer ends in an A. The old cello mellow, and it's far from the mellow sound. Yep, far from mellow. Now this original piece has a lot of whimsy in it. This is part of where that whimsy comes through in the sound design in this piece, in that it's not a full lead. You can put a lot of whimsy in your main lead, but then it can wear off. But it's where we first hear our melody. So I'm trying to decide how to balance that, and how to balance that is not based on the sound, it's based on the piece, on what it's doing. So there are times where it's playing a background role. There are times where it steps into the lead. I've done my trick here of boosting a higher harmonic, which allowed me to reduce the bass. So it's given a little bit more clarity there. I want to boost somewhere in the higher end, but with this sound, because it's so full of interesting harmonics and strange doubly noises, it's complex. I don't want it to sound harsh. It's not a Nine Inch Nails record. We got so I'm finding a spot where I feel like, yep, I can hear some of that interesting, weird stuff that it does, the ring modulatory stuff that it does, because the carrier for the ring modulator doesn't change pitch in line with the oscillators that you're hearing. So different notes have different tones and different weird stuff going on. So I found a point where that seems to cut through the mix fairly nicely when it's in both roles. Where in some ways I'd like this to have some presence in the mix with air, the more we boost that, the more we just get that Nine Inch Nails kind of stuff going on, which I absolutely don't want here. Our violence. Saw some bloop happening down there. No sense in keeping that. Now you saw me filter that off. Now I'm putting it back in again. But if I'd just gone less on the filter and less here, I wouldn't have the same sound. So you'll see that my filter's cutting off, I don't know, here, say. I'm putting a bit of a boost back here. So it's almost a little like a notch in between. I'm saying I want to hear a little bit more of what was happening up here, even though I've cut most of it off. I don't want to hear all of what's happening in here. So in theory, if I'd known everything that was going to happen, I could perhaps have said, okay, I won't worry about that low pass filter, I'll just put in a good notch filter here. But it's not going to sound the same, so I'll live with what I've done. Concerned I may be making that sound too thin. The low parts, yeah, they can tend to muddy, but if I pull them out, my string starts to then sound thin. I don't want this string to sound thin. It's the lead. It's playing a big role in here, even though it's only playing a single note. It wants to be kind of commanding. If this was a supporting string, if it was just, you know, your string pad sitting in the background, then I probably would have pulled that out, because I've had other stuff happening there, but I don't. But I also then just want to find the essence of stringiness in the tone of this sound, which is somewhere about there, which is actually really cool. Look, it's at 2, which happens to be what's generally considered the best cut frequency. So that's cool. My friend the trombone. Right, we don't need a lot of bass in this sound, but we do want the body that it brings. So I was careful to make sure that I wasn't chopping off that, even though there was a little bit of flub down here. I was happy to keep some of it, but just not when it gets right down in here. I'm boosting again somewhere around where that instrument really works. Oddly, in the arrangement, my arranger has decided to then let it play an octave high. I don't think trombones actually play there. It's taken it, in a sense, out of its comfort zone. But that's what we got, and it works. But I've just de-emphasized a little bit of that, but given a little bit of pull-through in the air frequency. Because this sound doesn't play all the time, but when it does play, I like what it plays. It plays nice canter melody. So it may not be unique, but it's a cool sound. So I'm going to give that a little bit of air as well. And French horn, which plays around the same time. probably about right. Noise. Just got to mostly make sure that this isn't doing things it shouldn't. I'm rolling off below about 35-40 because there's just no point having a sub flub. There's little gain in doing that. There is a presence down there for sure, but at 20 or below, our sub is visibly moving. I don't think there's any advantage in that. Commonly with noise-based sounds, I'll have quite a lot of up here as well, and I will commonly roll that off either with a low-pass filter or just with the EQ or something like that. But it's well tamed. We can see there's nothing up there, so I'm leaving that alone. That's really about all I need to do with that. Actually, I'll check the end of my piece. That's cool. Done with that. So that's my tone all done. Now, I know that I need panning, but you'll see I've studiously avoided it, because in that pass, I'm chasing tone. Now I want to look at space. What's going to live there? Still happy enough with my reverb. My drums I'm going to want to have in the middle. Except that toms I broke out. But I'm going to pull those guys back. Actually, I am going to bust them now. Because I'm going to pull them back. I think that's about right. Drums I don't always get right first go. Not uncommon for me to have them too loud. Sometimes I have them too soft. That's part of why I'll go check my mix in the other room, often after I've watched TV and everything. So I've cleared the old palette somewhat. But I think they're too loud naturally. Not at all uncommon when you get a mix. But I'm going to do something unusual for me. Because I want this section to be right. Now these two really play the same game, so I think they probably need to pan. See, so we've effectively pulled quite a bit off those drums. I pulled 3 dB off before, and we've got another 3-4 dB off. So we've actually dropped 7 dB, which is close to where I thought in the first place. I thought I'd probably want to take 6 dB off this. Effectively, what we've done is pushed this up. I could have just probably gotten away with going, okay, I'll just take those two and slide them up. Don't like sliding much of anything up. I could well have done what would be common for me to go and say, okay, I want to put those two up. But I also felt, unusually for me, that I wanted to find a new balance by introducing all these variables. So let's start here. Okay, if you hadn't worked it out, what I was doing there was actually reducing the width. Now this device turns out to be true stereo. So because I'm giving it true stereo, now I could actually also solve that just by pulling the jack out. Actually, that might be the better way to do it. Now I think about it. I'm just going to pull the jack out, so what I feed it gets sent into stereo. Now you can be gorgeously stereo. Minus 20, minus 49. It didn't feel like that reverb was creating one room. One of the real problems I have with a perfect true stereo reverb device is that if something's panned to the right, all the reverb only really comes from the right, which just doesn't happen in a room. If you've got someone standing over there speaking, you're hearing them from over there as well. So while I know people can get bent out of shape about things not being true stereo, the advantage of your reverbs in this situation is that they pull everything into the same space. So in this case, I forced it to take a mono mix of everything that is sent, and then create its own faux stereo out of that, which imposes a single space on this piece, which is necessary. Like, we whacked the guys in a room. We said, get in the room. Now I have a problem with how my cello and melody are coming together. I feel like I've swamped somehow. Maybe it's this reverb. Something's still just not sitting right, and I need to find the balance to let those instruments get separated out so that they speak well in the mix. They speak well musically. Okay, what that's made me do is realise that I kind of undid something that the original composer did, not me, the original composer of this piece, and I'm sorry I've forgotten her name right now, the lady who wrote the theme for Father Brown, in the way that she'd done it. She actually had this cello here kind of in the middle, and decisions I made, fine, they worked before, but they didn't quite work now. So I thought, okay, these two are going to be the core. No, the reality is these two make the pair, and this makes the difference in the triplet. So the way I've got them set now is working. Yes, it works. Now, the thing there is to say, okay, I made a decision, but to acknowledge it was a wrong decision. That when I listen to the piece, rather than saying my decision was right and the piece should bend to my will, no, you're not the God of the piece. The piece is the God of you, especially if someone else wrote it. Really, especially if someone else wrote it. You know, you can be arrogant and go, oh, I'm doing a remix and I sampled one note and I stretched it out and grown it. It's like, piss off. The piece is your God. Your role is to pray that you can express what that piece has to say. For a while there, I got it wrong. And to have the courage to admit when you have it wrong, to be able to recognize that something's just not firing right, the piece isn't expressing itself well. I recognized that, took some time, worked out why it wasn't expressing itself right. Part of what let me do that effectively was understanding the parts of the piece. Now that can come from the fact that I've been working in this piece for a while now, so I understand what the parts are supposed to do. Not what I want them to do, but what they're supposed to do. I tried doing what I wanted them to do, and it wasn't working. So what I've done actually ends up going back to the original composer's idea. She's a better composer than me. Besides, she wrote the beginning of this. I wrote the back of this, but I cribbed that off her ideas. So it's still, I've got to honour her piece. Otherwise, creating some other random piece of garbage. So, when something's not working, have the fortitude to say this isn't working. Then have the fortitude to separate your parts out, whether they be arrangement parts or instrumental parts, and to work out what they're really trying to say. Honour what they're trying to say, help them say that, and then suddenly you'll find, oh, that goes together. You may learn a thing or two about it. So we've got everything, I think, pretty well balanced, or as well as I can be comfortable here. The last mix I did in the cans, I was pleased with it stayed. So I'm going to call this done. Normally, I would go and check my mix and give myself some time to do something else. But you'll love mastering, so I'm prepared to commit. Number one, let's look at the groove of our piece. Now let me make sure that I'm in a situation in which I can be looking at the groove. Now remember, right now, all I'm working on is a 2-track. All of this stuff can be forgotten, unless you've got a problem and then scoot back to it. So, 2 tracks, this is probably the busiest part. So here, as I open this up, there's a point where suddenly it starts to seem a little bit more happy bunnies. Which incidentally is partially being driven by that drum kit. I know this sounds like shite because it's distorting like a bastard, but I'm not listening to that. All I'm listening to is that groove, the fact that it starts to... It's got to do that within the confines of the song, but largely what the song is doing will drive that. So you won't get that happy bunnies thing until you're actually honouring the song, as a general rule of thumb. But if you're working on a country track and you focus on making it groove like a disco track, unless that's a bonus feature in that track, Juice Newton or something, then just be cautious, but mostly you'll find that it's bringing out something cool in the track. Okay, we've glued everything together a little bit more there. Happy with that. I might try something in this. Yeah, I'll put it in as I think about it, but we'll have it off. Bye-bye. Thank you. Now, I'm not looking to change my mix. Again, remind you, your mastering is never about changing your mix. If you're trying to change your mix in your master, your mix was wrong. Stop, go back. Turn all this stuff off and go back, fix your mix. What I'm looking to do with this at the moment is I'm just looking for that little bit of extra air, which is a kind of sparkle. I do this after the compressor because compressors can make things a little dull because they're driven by the bottom end of the mix, and therefore they can be a little harder on the top end of the mix. And I know some of you are going, oh, but Beric, you should be using multi-band compressors. Piss off, they sound bloody awful. If I feel like I've got a situation where a multi-band compressor is necessary, I will not use one. I'll see if there's another solution, but if the multi-band compressor is the solution, it's not a multi-band compressor, it's going to be a dynamic EQ, which is an EQ which has compressor-only features, and it'll say take this and use the compressor features to do that. I see multi-band compressors, no matter how much the creators, the developers, the sellers of such said multi-band compressors tell you they're the solution for everything. I've heard from somebody in the know that they're barely used in mastering, outside of people with doors who listen to manufacturers who have a very big vested interest in selling multi-band compressors, that they're barely used. So each to her own, but listening to somebody's tips and tricks that says you must use a multi-band compressor, no, sounds really weird, and I have tried them. I've made my own, don't like it. So I'm looking for that little bit of sparkle here. Actually, I'm going to kill that guy, because there are things about this mix that I want that this wee fella does. I know everyone will say to you, keep the auto gains on so that you're not listening to the volume changes. All you're hearing is a tone change. Largely all I'm hearing is nothing. So I would rather hear the volume changes and be aware. Now, being a pure synth mix, just about everything's going through its low-pass filter. It's 24 dB roll-off. So there's not a hell of a lot actually up there in the air arena, because we're not dealing with the top of somebody's voice, we're not dealing with the top of a string, we're dealing with synths, which means that we can sometimes get a little more aggressive, or need to be a little bit more aggressive to find the air in that mix. This device is incredibly sweet, very forgiving and very sweet. We then might want to look at different characters. American's good. All they are is different EQ curves, different shapes on the way that EQ behaves. Sounds like garbage, but I'm just looking for that point where it seems a bit much. So if we go back, does my mix seem to clarify when I move that little bit out? I think it does. I hope it does. Normally I'd be super careful doing that, and I still actually, to be honest, have to be super careful because these things are not subs. I don't mix with subs either, but I can make something sound sort of what I think I want it to sound like in here, and they can be horrifically off on speakers and on my sub. I know the translation between my Yamos and my Sony sub out front. Don't really know the translation here, but I know it's not as equal. So while it was tempting there to get this really nice in here, I think it was going to become a on the other end. It was just going to be too much. Yeah, it'd be impressive, but I don't think it was going to be musical. So I'll let that sit. Which may mean that I don't need this fella, but I'll try it. It's here. Now, the other thing is, you also need to be careful of your ears and your brain. How long have you been listening to this piece now? For easily a couple of hours now. It's not good to do it all in this one session. My poor brain's a bit tired of this. It's starting to find that I don't hear it as clearly. But I'm going to keep going because that was a commitment. I'm not sure, therefore it's going. We've got saturation coming in the middle of this fella. There's two layers of saturation coming in that. I'm not sure that adding a third is adding anything other than bits of distortion. Let's go into mono. Here's where I was having the issue before as it comes in. really feel like we've got a conflict here still. Not surprising. Not surprising at all. Striking me at this point that this cello melody sound may be excessively complex. Sounds great on its own, but it's, I think, excessively complex. Okay, problem solved. The ring mod sounded great on its own. It was like, oh, let's make this sound super interesting. The problem was that when it came to the end of the process, it was just too complex to actually work anywhere. I was losing the ability to hear the musical lines, no matter how cool that sound was. Now, I could get away with a certain amount of that in stereo, but when I put it into mono, I was screwed. Now you might go, but bang, nobody listens to anything in mono. Bluetooth tub, laptop speakers, phones. Now I hope nobody ever does that to any of my music, but the reality is they will. And if I've taken one of my main melodic elements and buggered it, not a wise idea. So I've made it work now in mono. So it changes my mix a little. prepared to go with that. It's the right thing to do. Yes, the sound isn't quite as interesting as it was, but the piece works. That's what matters. Your audience are not going to say, oh, that's a boring sound, or that's not as exciting as you could have been. They're not going to say, why didn't you ring modulate that sound to make it very chewy? They're just going to say, do I like this piece or not? If they have problems hearing the piece and everything it's trying to say, they'll just go, I don't really like that. So, while there will be a few people who go, oh, but that's a boring sound, it doesn't have enough ring modulation, they're never going to buy your piece anyway, ignore them. So, we're now very much in mastering mode, so we're going to take this soft clip off and put it onto full mode. Look ahead. See how we have achieved the things that you wanted to? You wanted the drums to be more... As we bypass, they do become that, but within the context of the mix. Not my normal thing, but let's have another go with a stereoifier imager above the mono switch. Just taking a punt that those toms could go just a touch higher, not too much because they get pretty busy there and we don't want like a really annoying thing. Seeing we've pulled them out a little bit. I think that stereo imager has actually clarified the signal in mono, which is good. It has helped in stereo. So our loud bits. Again, checking to see that I've got headroom in my mix. I pushed a little harder there, might be good. It's going to take time to listen on other speakers and have it in context of other music to see if that's good or if it's pushed too hard. Do have a concern. I'm worried that as we push it hard, those drums have become too big. Better off, I think. Again, working in these cans, bass is a speculative deal, but by dropping it off, it allows me to push the whole mix a little bit harder. Pushing the whole mix a little bit harder means that it actually brings the drums and that bass up in comparison. So I think the balance is the right tone, rather than going, oh yes, I can get that lovely 8080 type kick or CR type kick feel in there, but I think that yes, that's lovely, but it's focusing just on that sound, not on the mix, and I think that sound will be considered at the expense of the mix when I sit down and listen to that in a sub. So quick run through of at least some parts. I think I'm going to call this done. Now what I realise here, listening to the whole thing, is that I probably should give this a little bit of automation. It seemed like it was right and even before, but now when I'm listening to the whole thing, I'm feeling a little bit like, yeah, you're a bit heavy-handed there. So now that's probably come, from lack of velocity. I could go back to the composition, but I don't think at this point it's right to go back to the composition. The composer, at that point, and that was me, has said, no, I'm happy with this the way it is. I don't want to change the performance. That sounds a lot better. Yeah, it's letting the rest of the piece speak. Okay, just listening to the various parts and what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve, and also with reference to each other. Where they come from, where are they going to? Very easy to go, oh, that sounds good there, but how does it sound as part of the story? As an aside, I'm actually really happy with how that sounds now. Taking away the ring modulatiness of all of it has actually allowed it to be a far more elegant sound. Okay. What if we take this fella? In there. Okay. So I'm going to call myself happy with this now. I think it's worked out to be a nice piece, a nice mix. Obviously, bearing in mind I'm in Cairns. So I'm going to go off and export song as audio file, save, and say thanks very much for watching.